Hey everyone, my name is Monica Martinez, and I'm going to be looking at Jamboards in today's video. As you can see from my screen, we are looking at a Jamboard that has already been pre-created. And for those of you not familiar with Jamboards, think of them as whiteboards, places where you can brainstorm, come together, and collaborate on boards together or individually work on a board. What you see also on my screen is where it says cross-race effect. And I wanted to share this example because it is a way in which I use Jamboard that is probably different from a lot of ways that Jamboard would normally be used. But when we look at issues that we face in relation to bias and racism and stereotyping, to me, this tool became really handy as a way to do an activity that I call peer portraits, as a way to tackle what's called cross-race effect and, of course, stereotyping and bias as well as racism. So let me just kind of share a little bit of detail with you in relation to what cross-race effect is and how that affects the way we think about people, and then we'll jump into how you can set up this activity for your students. So as you see on the screen, I've got a definition here on the left-hand side. Cross-race effect is basically the idea that as a person of a certain race, you're more likely to be able to identify individual traits and individuals within that same race. So in other words, I can tell the difference between Latinas. I'm a Latina and I can see differences between them. But perhaps a person who is African American or white who doesn't really know a lot of Latinas, doesn't hang around with Latinas, doesn't have Latina friends, if they were to come across a group of Latinas, to that person, they might look at them and say, wow, you guys look like sisters, because they're not able to distinguish individual characteristics of each of those different women that are before that person. And so they think they all look alike. And this tends to happen across a lot of different races. It's not just something that happens to any one person. And it's not something that that means automatically that you're a racist person. Instead, really, what it is the simple idea that we are used to digesting certain bits of information based on what surrounds us. And so we are surrounded by people that look like us or that are from our race. We're able to more specifically identify characteristics within that person. If we've never been around other groups of people, other races, or seldom are ever around people from different backgrounds, then we're going to struggle in being able to identify individual traits. So let's say that I come across somebody, a group of people who are Asian, and I basically look at them and I see, kind of like they all look the same to me, right? So I am then being affected by this phenomenon, right? Like this idea, this concept called the cross-race effect. And so author Jennifer Eberhardt, and she wrote the book called Biased. And she says that cross-race effect is like a precursor for bias, which could lead to racist actions. And this is why we're pinpointing this down and why we're doing this activity called peer portraits, to help us better not only identify individual traits, but to avoid putting people into categories. Because when we put people into categories and saying, oh, you look like sisters, you all look the same, you start to categorize not just that they look the same, but that they inherit stereotypical traits of Latinas. And that may not necessarily be the case for you and the other women that are there. Or for me, if I'm looking at a group of Asian women or men, or a group of Asian students, I might put them all into one bucket and maybe make the assumption that, oh, all these kids are going to be great at math, right? Because that's a stereotype that tends to be placed on Asians. So on the other slide, by the way, and these two slides here are not necessarily going to be a part of your activity that you do with your students, or maybe they are. This might be the way you deliver the lesson. But I'm using them here to be able to provide you guys that are watching this video with some of these definitions so that you understand why this particular activity is so important to help us be able to tackle and really debunk some of these stereotypes and, of course, the cross race effect. So stereotype here, as you can see on the left-hand side, has a definition. It is the oversimplified idea of a particular person or groups of people. And so we're categorizing people based on perhaps maybe the way they look, their hair color, their the shape of their nose, maybe. So we're basically putting people into buckets. And again, the challenge and the problem here is that these stereotypes lead to bias, mostly, well, not really mostly. It could be certainly implicit or explicit, but a lot of times stereotypes do come from our subconsciousness. And so we were not even aware that we're actually doing it. So take, for example, if we see, perhaps as a Latina or whatever race you are, if you see someone from another race, you might automatically, subconsciously assume something about that person, and then you respond based on that assumption. And that at a subconscious level is actually quite dangerous because we don't even recognize that we're doing it, and that could be something that's being done that is actually racist. So just a little bit there on that. I've got some links so you can pause the video and actually go back to those. This link here that's an interview with Jennifer Eberhardt. Again, she's the author of Bias, came from NPR. I highly recommend going to that link. It has a 7-minute interview with her, plus a more in-depth a breakdown of that interview in the copy that's within that particular page. So definitely recommend to look through that if you want to learn more about cross-race effects, stereotyping, implicit and explicit stereotypes. All right, so now that you have sort of that foundation for this, I'm going to go back to the very first Jamboard. So I have up here at the top, you can see I've got 7 different boards. And so I just went all the way to the left to get to my first one. So this is the idea. My students are going to draw another student in class. Now, this all depends on where you are with your students, how old they are, if they understand the concept, if they've gone through already lessons with you on giving feedback and critiquing, because you definitely don't want to just start here right off the bat without having already had your students better understand the process of critiquing and giving feedback, because they might be a little too critical and more critical about the person as opposed to what we're aiming for in this exercise, which is really about identifying individual characteristics and traits and features. So if your kids aren't ready for that and you think they're going to draw something and other kids are going to be hurt and offended, then they might not be ready for something like this. The whole goal is for the person who is drawing to develop skills in regards to really listening with your eyes. We're paying attention to detail with our eyes. So we're training ourselves to be more cognizant of individual characteristics and traits, as opposed to just blindly seeing, a group of people that we assume all pretty much look the same. So we're paying attention, we're being critical, we're looking critically and intentionally. So that's the idea behind this. You can see here up at the top left, so the idea is to have your students name their the different board they're on. So here Monica puts her name and she's saying she's drawing Yvonne. That's the person she's been assigned. And then it's going to use the board here to be able to draw that drawing. You're welcome to, of course, use the side here on the right to put instructions like I have here for you in this instance. Just FYI that you cannot put these on off canvas. As you can see there, I just did that and you can't see it. So unlike Google Slides, you cannot put content off to the side. So it has to be on the board itself. Of course, you can give directions to your students and not have to have these on the screen at all. So you could certainly eliminate that and then give the entire board to the student who's drawing that picture. The other thing I want to show you are these little, what look like sticky notes. Over here on the left-hand side, you have the ability to add a sticky note so a student can come in here and comment and say, I like how you captured XYZ or whatever. So you can actually have some feedback and input from other peers based on what you have drawn, right? What that student has drawn. Another example here really quick, I'm just going to forward here. So if you are worried about potential criticism and potential problems with kids drawing other kids in their classroom, that might turn into bullying of some sort, then I recommend selecting notable people like actors or artists, singers, etc., that the student can then draw, and that who they're drawing is actually someone from a different race. So this would be the case too if your students are predominantly white and you don't have a mix of different students where students are really learning to identify features of in a person that's from a different race than themselves. If you don't have that mix in your classroom, then just have them draw other people. Have them select who they want. You don't have to actually pick who those people are. They can actually pick it. So if I'm white, then maybe you're asking them, okay, I'd like you to find 3 different Latina artists or 3 different Latinas, period. Like it could be an artist, it could be an astronaut, it could be anyone, right? But the idea is for your student to be able to draw someone from a different race or different background, different ethnicity, because what we want to do is help them train their minds to pay attention to that facial detail. And again, the whole concept and idea here is to help your students be able to identify things they normally wouldn't see in other races so that they can help train their minds to stop from basically from stereotyping and from putting people and people's traits into buckets. And so this is something we can do, especially from a younger age, like when kids are in K-12 environments, as opposed to later on as adults, which is a lot harder to unlearn and then relearn. Still something doable that you can do with professional development with your teachers as well. Here's another example that I wanted to share with you is using photos of your students if you're not able to connect virtually via like a Google Meet. So for example, and I do want to share this with you, I'm just going to open up a Google Meet here that I already have open. If you are doing this using the pictures that your kids are using on their Meet, or if they're live and they're actually, you can see their faces because the video's on, then what you can do, as you can see here on my screen in Google Meet, you can pin down people to the screen. And by pinning them down, that person consumes majority of my screen, and therefore I can now see that person on the screen and toggle back and forth between that and my Jamboard to be able to draw that person. Now, the other way to do this is really just to leverage Google Meet by pinning the person down and then just using pencil and paper and drawing the person with pencil and paper as opposed to the Jamboard. So you can leverage Google Meet with that pin feature down to be able to pin down the person you're drawing so you can see them better. But again, if that is an issue with your students, if you know this is going to be distracting, but you still want to do this activity, then I highly recommend doing professional people. And so your students would go over to the left-hand side. Once they identify who they're going to draw, they go to add image. And so let's just say we were doing Michael Jordan. And so I would look up Michael Jordan, find an image that is a good image for me to use to be able to draw him really well. So you definitely want a picture that focuses in on the face. So either of these, for example, or maybe even this one might be okay, but we're just going to pick this one. We're going to insert, and then we're going to bring this picture over here to the right-hand side. And over on the left, you can use the pen tool as well as the shapes that you have here. So you have the circle, a square, triangle, etc. And you've got a pen as well as a marker if you want something thicker, and you can certainly change some of those colors. Now, the idea here is that they are drawing. We don't want them to just duplicate and find a picture and then you're good to go. This is that person. We do want your students to draw because we want them to pay close attention to all of those individual details. Last thing I want to share with you here about Jamboards, in case you're new to Jamboard, you'll notice up here at the top right-hand side, just like everything else in the Google tools, like Google Docs and Google Slides and Sheets, etc., they all have the share button. Jamboard has the very same share button up here at the top right. You can share these with your students using their Google accounts. You can also just simply share the way I've shared mine, which is anyone with a link can edit, and therefore all of my attendees in a session are going to be able to get in there without me needing their Google accounts. But if you're doing this with your students, I highly recommend you share this specifically with your students and not open it to anyone with the link, because that link can be shared and other students that are not in your classroom might jump in there and start messing with things. So I would share it specifically with your students. Up here at the top, as you move over into the next frame, as you click through, it'll add a new frame, and that's how you add new ones. So I currently have 7, so this is the 7th out of 7, and if I click on the right arrow, it creates an 8th Jamboard for my other students. So if you've got 30 students, then obviously you're going to have 30 different Jamboards, 1 per student, for them to be able to complete this. I hope this has been useful to you as showcasing a way to use Jamboards in a very different way. Obviously, here we're targeting the issue of stereotypes, cross-race effect, bias, racism, etc. And this particular tool really allows us that sort of flexibility to be able to create something that helps us become better at being anti-bias and anti-racist.